This is footage from 2022 when I first decided to start renovating this building. The reason I'm showing footage from 3 years ago is because despite having renovated this place for years already, in this particular room, nothing has really changed. It is still a complete mess and kind of unusable outside of storing endless amounts of junk, which is precisely what it is being used for. And that's actually the problem as well, because as long as it's full of junk, I can't really renovate it, but I can't just throw things I don't need out the window either, because in order to throw something away, it first needs to be sorted and then brought to waste or recycling centers, which is something I actually already did some years ago when this room started getting really bad. But that also means that what remained were things that I decided not to throw away at that time, because most of them are tools or materials that might be used or for the very least sold in the future, so emptying out this room is really complicated as long as I don't have an alternative storage area. Now, those of you who have seen the rest of this series might say that, wait, doesn't this building also have a really big basement? And it does, but because this building was essentially abandoned, the basement no longer has heating, so it's quite moist, meaning that everything I'd put there would just rot or corrode away. However, I do have this wooden garage outside, which is the real reason why I spent some time organizing it in the last video, so I could move some things from that room to here. But I mean, to be honest, it's pretty unrealistic that I can put literally everything here, considering that I haven't even gotten started yet, and it's already almost impossible to walk here. But for the longest time, I've been dreaming of making this big room at least into something, so I needed to get started from somewhere. And so I did. I started clearing out this particular section under the window here. Speaking of which, it probably hadn't been opened nor cleaned ever since this building was built, so it was incredibly dirty. In fact, the entire room kind of is, so it doesn't smell that great either, which means that being in this room is really not that pleasant, which is another reason why it really needs to be emptied out and renovated before it can be used for anything else. But even though I literally just got started, I already felt like getting rid of literally everything in this room is quite possibly kind of impossible this year, so I came up with this idea that what if I just move everything from the left side of the room to the right and only focus on one side at a time. That way, even if I'm unable to get it completely renovated this year, I at least made some level of progress, because otherwise next year is going to be exactly the same thing all over again. And already after like only a half a day of work, I was able to organize most of the tools to the right side of the room, which is great because now I actually know where everything is. Throughout the renovations, I wasted so much time on searching for some specific tool or a screw of a particular size, because before everything was just scattered around this hay pile of tooling. That being said though, there was still clearly a lot of work to do, definitely too much for a single day, so during the following days, I started clearing out the other side of that wall. I actually did it mostly off camera because it took so long that I felt like I wanted to focus on making progress rather than on recording, or at least that's my backwards rationalization for why I don't have any footage, because I'm kinda surprised I didn't record any of it, and I'm also not really sure why there is an 11 clip gap in the file names either. But regardless, there was this table there that, from what I know, is at least 100 years old and it has been passed down generations, so I guess it's a good idea to store it safely, as it might be interesting to restore it one day, but I'm not sure if I'm going to be the one doing that. And so, after around a week of work, I was successfully able to clear out one half of the room. I'm pretty sure this building hasn't been this empty for decades, and it was so much more organized than before. I even made my axe, crowbar, hammer collection a bit prettier. But this progress was really promising, not only because I already basically succeeded in my plan of focusing only on one side, but in doing so, I was also able to get a sense of how to actually proceed in making this room even emptier than it just became. So the next thing I decided to clear out was the top of this basement staircase hut, and I was pretty curious to see exactly what's up here, because I know it has a ton of paper type things, but I never really checked what's under the first layer. This box that almost fell on my head was pretty funny because it was a big Marlboro box. I'm not really sure whether or not it was bought for reselling or for personal use, but it was full of old wallpapers. I'm not sure if anyone even wants to use them anymore outside of some art projects, because I assume they smell musty at this point. And this was the rest of the loot. It was mostly paper, just as I expected, as well as some strings, cover material and so on. And I also found this old SMS campaign from 2005 by this meme status vodka company here that everyone knows. There were also some of these tiles left over from the brown wall. But anyway, I noticed that after clearing it out, as a side effect, I can now kind of see the window from the other side, which is nice because now there's a bit more light in the room. But speaking of this corner here, I wanted to move everything from here to the shed. But the shed didn't really have much room left anymore, so first I had to organize it a bit, and luckily I was able to secure just enough room to put those things here. I guess as a change of pace, I randomly started working on making these windows a bit prettier. And on that line of thought, I started thinking of perhaps transforming the entire room by painting it. So in preparation for that, I started removing these random screws and nails from the walls. And even though I didn't record most of it, I'm pretty sure I pulled out like over 100 of them in total. And just like when I first got started with the smaller room at the beginning of the series, I also started removing the loose paint. And even though the walls weren't as crumbly in this room as they were in the previous one, they were so dirty that I still decided to go over every square inch of them. It really felt like if I were to start painting them in this state, it would just ruin the paint, so there was also this old security movement sensor here. Something that was a bit problematic though was this particular wall here around the window, because it's not like the other walls in the sense that it's built later because it was actually a garage door before, so it wasn't finished the same way, and over time it just got completely ruined due to moisture. So I figured that the best move would probably be just to cover it with drywall. But anyway, after hours of grinding, quite literally, I was done with cleaning the first wall. Now, even though earlier in the video I did say that I was going to focus just on one side of the room, I suddenly felt like I still actually really want to go for the entire room, because to be honest, if only one half of the room was renovated, then as a whole, it still won't be pleasant enough to be usable. So I kept on going with the other side as well, and once again, removing all the metal was really difficult because sometimes they were just so stuck that it took me like 30 minutes just to get something out. Like, why does this nail have to be so long? And even my hammer broke. But the part I definitely hated the most was scraping the walls, because it was just such dirty, nasty work. Like, I was using safety goggles that kept fogging up because I also wore an underpowered face mask, but I think I really needed some full face respirator instead, because I felt like I was still breathing a ton of this dust in. Like, look how dirty just this one corner got. Cleaning it all up was really annoying as well. I also wanted to get rid of this old radiator pipe, and it was really difficult to cut it because of the angle. I was worried that the wooden construction right next to it might catch fire, but I couldn't see what was going on because I had to keep it at an angle where the sparks didn't fly straight into my face. And eventually I found that angle and I succeeded, but looking back at the footage, I discovered that the sparks flew directly into the camera of my phone, and while the lens itself was luckily fine, the exposed back part of my phone does have some damage now. Anyway, the more time I spent in this room, the more I started feeling as if that big hut above the staircase should perhaps be removed. Now, of course, it does prevent you from falling down into the basement, but as a thought experiment, if this room was already completely renovated, would this hut, in its current state, be in the final picture as well, or would the basement just be covered with some trapdoor instead? Moreover, it was also in the way of cleaning and painting the wall, so I decided to remove it after all. Holy shit. Sheesh. Oh no. Well, there's no window there. Rip. Can I not just paint from being at this point? Oh. Was that a yes or a no? Shortcut, what the fuck? Maybe I can. Soon enough, the hut was gone, and immediately the room had much more light in it, and it felt more open and breathable as well, so definitely don't regret just yeeting it out of the way. Now I just gotta hope nobody walks over the ledge though. Now it was time to fill all the holes in the wall, and I never realized how deep the radiator holes actually were. Definitely completely overkill for the purpose they served. Unfortunately, many of the holes I filled ended up cracking the next day, so I had to go over them a few more times off camera, and I sanded them as well. I even tried covering this wooden part of that sad wall I talked about earlier, and while it did sorta work, it used up so much gypsum plaster that I felt like there is no point in doing this if the better idea is just to cover it with drywall anyway. But now that all the preparation was done, it was finally time to start painting. And this was the result of the first pass. To be honest, it didn't really look all that great, but it was more or less what I expected because the paint I used was actually the same primer that I used at the beginning of the series as well. And these walls are incredibly thirsty, so it ended up just becoming very translucent. But this time, instead of applying multiple coats of primer, I decided that I'll proceed with real paint, which is something I've wanted to try ever since I painted the other room where I used only primer. But something else I also wanted to do a bit differently this time was properly paint these electrical covers. And because regular paint doesn't look very good on them, I decided to try spray painting. And even though I've used spray paint quite a lot, I was surprised at how many coats I needed for them to start looking properly white. I almost used up the entire can, but I was decently satisfied with the end result. So after spending like 10 minutes on getting this can of real paint open, it was time to give the wall the next coating, for which I also bought this new roller, which was a bit fluffier than the previous one, and I bought it because I didn't even realize that perhaps the reason why painting these walls was so painfully time consuming for me was because the roller I was using just didn't have good enough coverage. So I was pretty excited to try it out to see how much it was going to help. And I was actually a bit surprised, or rather a bit disappointed that the real paint wasn't as magical as I was hoping it to be. It was still rather translucent, which meant that not only will I still have to do multiple passes, but also that I might actually run out of paint before I can even finish the room. Which is why I decided to first cover only the lower half, because the upper one sucked way more paint, so it was really difficult to paint evenly if I went completely up and down. It's a bit hard to tell on video, but even after the first pass, the radiator ridges and such were still kind of visible, so I gave the lower half another coat, and because I still had some primer left over, I decided to use that for priming the upper half of the wall a bit more before using real paint on it. By far the most difficult section to paint was the ceiling, not only because it was over 70 square meters, but also because of physics. Painting a ceiling is inherently more straining, which made the fact that it also required multiple coats all the more overwhelming. I actually kept running out of paint, so I bought a specialized paint meant for ceilings. But when I first started using it, I was pretty concerned because it looked really shiny and I could clearly see every stroke I did. So I was worried that the end result is going to be looking very inconsistent as well. But luckily once it completely dried, it ended up curing to basically perfection in the sense that I was completely satisfied with it. And with that, I had also finally finished painting the entire room. And this is how much paint I used. Literally every single one of these buckets is empty, so even though I did have to spend a lot of money on extra paint, luckily I utilized all of it. But it was still too early to celebrate because I wanted to do something about these window frames as they didn't really look all that great. So I figured that perhaps I should try painting them as well, which is something I never did in the previous room. So I removed a bunch of windows, and pretty much the moment I began painting, it also started raining really hard, so the window frames got really wet. This process was pretty interesting because I was really excited to see the final result of these freshly painted windows. I felt like it's one of those tiny touches that can really transform the room. But the paint I was using was actually meant for exteriors, which meant that it was really thick and kinda hid the pretty wood texture, so I tried to not overuse it as much as possible. Though most of these windows were in such a bad shape that I pretty much had no choice. Like, protecting the wood itself became the primary objective, so I didn't really bother buying white paint for these small parts holding the glass panels together. Speaking of which, I also wanted to fix the window that broke in the last episode, so I went searching for some glass, and surprisingly I had a matching panel in the basement. But before I start messing with this really big panel, I was wondering whether or not I can find a smaller one somewhere else as well, and I did. So I tried cutting it into the correct size using this glass cutter that I found whilst organizing the room earlier in the video. And let's just say that it didn't go too well, so I just taped the old panels together. And with all that, all the windows in the room had finally been painted. Of course, in the video it happened like literally instantly, but to be honest, it would have been nice if the paint was a bit closer to that original slightly translucent brown, because I really liked that nice grain of the wood when the sun was on it, but I'm still pretty satisfied with the result, especially when compared to what it was before. Though, technically speaking, I should just put new windows here, but that costs a lot of money and it takes like half a year before they will arrive anyway, so at least for the time being, this still transformed the room somewhat. The only problem is that I'm not sure if I'll ever get these windows open again because the paint kinda glued them shut. Oh well. But I wasn't done yet, because these skirting boards really didn't look all that great, especially because I smeared paint all over them, so I figured that the best option was just to make them completely white, but before that I had to of course clean them. During the process, I wiped the floor a bit as well, and damn, it really put into perspective just how dirty the floors had gotten. And after scraping the bottoms of the buckets I had left over and giving them like 4 passes, they turned out mostly white, but I mean, to be honest, if this place had better flooring or even just unfinished concrete, I'd prefer to just buy new skirting boards because they don't cost that much, yet they make an incredibly big visual difference. It can literally make the difference between an old room that has only been painted and a fresh renovation with lofty style walls or something. But the biggest eyesore for sure had to be all this remaining stuff in the middle of the room. Now, I'm sure many of you have noticed that this room is actually a lot emptier than it was before, and that's because at one point I got some help and we emptied out an entire van load of garbage from the wooden garage that unfortunately I literally didn't take a single picture of, so here's an illustration instead. And thanks to that, I was able to fit way more stuff in here. But I didn't want to put all of the tools here for various reasons, so I ended up just bringing them to a completely different storage location instead. And even though the brick wall still wasn't finished, I really felt like the bricks don't need to be in this room. But the issue just was that the wooden garage once again had no space, so I had to move the other bricks that I brought there years ago to fit these ones in that garage. And at long last, the only thing left in this room was the boiler. But that was fine because I still needed to do something about this floor that had gotten really dirty. It was so dirty, in fact, that even after multiple passes, it was still pretty bad. Mostly because when I tried to mop it, the water turned brown pretty much instantly. But even if I were to get this floor close to completely clean, the problem is that it kind of smells, and I don't think it's possible to get rid of this smell because at this point the floor is just so old and soaked full of dirt. Which is why I really wish there was a concrete floor here, especially because I could also connect it to the central heating system, but just like with everything else, it costs money. So yeah, if you want this series to continue, consider supporting it financially. No, seriously, I literally spent the last 3 months on it and I unironically have to start spamming sponsored videos now. So anyway, I guess we have finally arrived at the end of the video again, and to be honest, I really did not expect to make as much progress as I did. I still cannot believe that the store has gotten almost completely empty, and the final result also looks much better than what I hoped for. Of course, there is still a lot of work to do. Aside from some final touches and the flooring, I also have to make sure that this room actually survives the winter by, first and foremost, insulating this fake wall that I discovered even leaks rainwater. And I also haven't done anything about this hole that leads to the basement yet either. But for the time being, I feel like I've already succeeded in transforming this room pretty close to that dream that I was talking about at the beginning of the video.